The town of Red Hollow was the kind of place where dust settled before a man's pride ever did. It sat on the edge of the frontier, framed by harsh desert mesas and a thin strip of green where the river bent in a stubborn curve. Most days were quiet, predictable. Safe Dot and Sheriff Douglas Hawley liked it that way. He liked order. He liked being the man people looked to. Above all, he liked being feared just enough to never be questioned. So when the Apache warrior walked into Red Hollow that scorching afternoon, Sheriff Hawley felt something shift, something he didn't like. The man came on foot, tall and calm, with the sun behind him like a long shadow. He wore no weapons beyond a sheathed knife and carried nothing but a small leather pouch at his hip. His hair was braided and wrapped in red cloth. His eyes scanned the town with the same steady patience one used to study a landscape before entering it. Hawley was standing on the boardwalk, near the saloon when the murmurs began. "That's an Apache. Heard they move like ghosts. Which one is he?" Fear spread faster than a rumor in a dry town, and Hawley sensed his authority slipping. Just because a stranger had walked in without asking permission from anyone, he strode forward, boots thudding on planks. "Well now," Hawley called, loud enough for all to hear. "You're a long way from your camp, aren't you?" The Apache warrior stopped and looked at him. Not challenging, not submissive, just noticing him. As if Hawley were one more object in the street, no more important than a watering trough or a loose horse. That look made Hawley bristle. "I asked you a question, Injun." No reaction. Not even a flicker of anger. The townsfolk grew silent, sensing something they couldn't name. Hawley took another step. "You hear me?" I said. "I heard," the warrior replied, his voice low and even. His English was accented but clear. "And I am not lost." Hawley wasn't used to calm. It unsettled him more than anger ever could. "You got business here?" The warrior lifted the small leather pouch. "I bring medicine for the woman who teaches your children." Miss Ruth Marlin, the schoolmistress, stepped forward from the crowd, surprise softening her features. "You came," she whispered. "Thank you." The warrior nodded once and handed her the pouch. The sheriff blinked. "You know him?" Before Miss Marlin could answer, a cowboy snickered. "Medicine man looks more like a scarecrow to me." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Quick and nervous, Hawley felt his authority returning. People were watching him again. He seized the moment. "That so?" Hawley said loudly. "Maybe he's not a scarecrow. Maybe he's one of those big warriors the tribes brag about." He slapped the Apache lightly on the shoulder. "Tell me, how many men you kill for that fancy braid?" The town froze. The Apache slowly stepped back, not from fear, but from understanding that a line had been crossed. His eyes lowered, not in submission but disappointment. It was a quiet, heavy gesture, and it made Hawley feel small in a way he couldn't explain. "I did not come for trouble," the warrior said simply. Hawley barked a mocking laugh. "Then why don't you turn around and go back into the hills where you belong?" Miss Marlin whispered fiercely, "Sheriff, stop." But Hawley was committed now. Pride was a more vicious enemy than any outlaw. "You ain't welcome here." Hawley finished. The Apache considered him for a long, silent moment. Then he said, "I am leaving. But remember, this disrespect is a seed. It grows." He walked out of town with the same steady stride he arrived with. No threat, no fear, yet as he disappeared into the shimmering horizon, people whispered, "That wasn't just any Apache. That was Hashtnaba, the one they call the deadliest man alive." And Sheriff Hawley felt the first tremor of a fear he would soon come to know well. Red Hollow tried to return to normal the next day, but the quiet carried an edge. People walked a little faster, spoke a little softer, and kept glancing toward the road where the Apache warrior had disappeared. A stranger leaving town shouldn't have mattered, but everyone felt the weight of the sheriff's insult. Even if no one dared say it aloud, Sheriff Hawley felt it most. He sat in his office, boots on the desk, pretending to read reports. But his eyes weren't on the paper, they were on the window, watching townsfolk whisper outside. He knew their looks. They weren't admiring him. They weren't reassured. They were judging. And Hawley hated being judged. More than anything, he slammed the report shut. That Apache should have been locked up, he muttered. Could have taught folks not to fear shadows. Deputy Owen glanced up from sorting wanted posters. Young, wide-eyed, and far too honest for the frontier, Owen hesitated before speaking. Sheriff. He didn't actually do anything illegal. Hawley shot him a glare sharp enough to cut leather. He disrespected me. That's enough. Owen swallowed hard. With respect, sir. I think you disrespected him first. Silence fell heavy and dangerous. Hawley stood, jaw tight. We're going after him. Owen paled. On what charge? Hawley didn't answer. He didn't need to. Pride had become a law all its own. They found the Apache about a mile outside town, kneeling beside a shallow stream, filling a waterskin. He rose when the two riders approached, but he didn't step back, didn't reach for his knife. He simply regarded them with that same unreadable calm. Sheriff Hawley dismounted, hand resting on his revolver. You were told to leave. You should have kept walking. The warrior nodded once. I did. Not far enough, Hawley snapped. Owen cleared his throat. Sheriff, maybe. Quiet, deputy. He faced the Apache directly. You're under arrest for refusing the lawful command of a peace officer. The warrior blinked once slowly. Your command was not lawful. It was pride. Heat crawled up Hale's neck. Put your hands behind your back. The Apache didn't move. Hawley drew his revolver, not pointed at him, just a warning. But even that didn't stir fear in the warrior's eyes. Finally, the Apache said evenly, I do not fight without reason. But I will not be bound like an animal for your pride. Hawley lunged. It was over in less than a heartbeat. The warrior moved like wind around stone, fluid and precise. He caught Hale's wrist, twisted just enough to disarm him without breaking anything, and kicked the sheriff's boot from under him. Hawley hit the dirt with a thud that echoed louder in his pride than his bones. Owen fumbled for his gun, but the Apache had already scooped up both revolvers and tossed them into the stream. Not far, just enough to make retaliation inconvenient. Then he stepped back, hands empty, posture calm. I do not hurt men who do not understand what they do, he said. Owen stared, breathless. Hawley, face red with fury and humiliation, scrambled to his knees. You attacked an officer. Hawley spat. No, the warrior replied. I defended myself from a fool. Even Owen winced. The Apache bowed his head once, formal, respectful, even then, and walked away. Feet silent on the stones. Hawley watched him go, hatred curdling into something darker. Owen approached cautiously. Sheriff, he didn't hurt you. He could have broken your arm. Or worse. Hale's fists clenched. That's what makes it worse. What do you mean? He didn't fear me. Owen, he didn't even think I was worth fighting. The sheriff stood, dusted off his vest, and stared at the warrior's fading silhouette. No Apache makes a fool of Douglas Hall. Owen shifted uncomfortably. What are you going to do, sir? Hale's voice hardened to, Steele, find out who he really is. And that was the moment the story truly changed, when the sheriff's reckless pride reached out and tangled itself in the life of a man he never should have provoked. By evening, word of the sheriff's humiliation had spread through Red Hollow like wildfire twisting through dry brush. No one dared say it openly, but everyone knew. The Apache warrior had put Sheriff Hawley on his back without once raising a weapon. And worse, the Apache had shown mercy. Mercy was harder to swallow than defeat. Holly returned to town furious, dust coating him like shame he couldn't brush off. His jaw was locked tight, his boots stomping so hard along the wooden walkways that doors trembled in their frames. Deputy Owen followed behind him, wringing his hat and praying to every saint he knew that the sheriff would just calm down. But Holly wasn't a man who calmed. He was a man whose pride burned in place of good sense. He shoved the office door open, marched inside, and dropped into his chair with a grunt. "Find out who he is," Holly ordered. Owen blinked. "Sir, there's no name to match." "He said nothing except—" "I know what he said," Holly snapped. "What I don't know is why a man that strong, that capable, is wandering alone. And why he's tied to our school teacher." Owen hesitated. "Maybe we should let him go. He doesn't seem like—" Holly slammed a fist onto the table. "You think I'm scared of him?" Owen wisely kept silent. Just then, the door opened and Miss Ruth Marlin stepped inside. Her usually gentle face was tight with urgency, cheeks flushed from marching straight from the schoolhouse. "We need to speak," she said sharply. Holly raised an eyebrow. "Well now, Miss Marlin doesn't often barge into the sheriff's office. This ought to be good." She ignored the jab and stepped closer. "Douglas Holly, do you have any idea what you've done?" The sheriff leaned back, folding his arms. "Enlighten me. That man you insulted. That man you tried to arrest." She took a breath. "You don't know him." "But I do." Owen's head snapped up. "You know who he is?" Miss Marlin nodded. "I lived with the Chiricahua Apache for nearly 6 months when I volunteered as a teacher near the reservation. It was long ago, but some people you don't forget." She swallowed. "And he is one of them. Who is he?" Holly demanded. Her eyes darkened, as though she feared the name itself. "His people call him Hashtanaba." Holly frowned. "And that means what?" "Anger of war," she whispered. "But that name isn't about violence. It's about discipline, control, strength held in reserve until absolutely necessary. He was the tribe's war champion, their strategist, their protector." Owen let out a slow breath. "The legend?" Miss Marlin nodded again. "The stories say he survived ambush that should have killed him, negotiated peace with tribes and settlers alike. And when he fights, he doesn't fight to show off. He fights to end danger." Holly scoffed, but it was weaker than before. "Stories. Children's tales. They're not tales." Ruth's voice sharpened. "Douglas, he disarmed you without even hurting you. Do you understand how deliberate that is? He only uses lethal force when there is no other choice." Owen nodded slowly. "Sheriff, he really did hold back." Miss Marlin walked closer and placed both hands on the desk, leaning in. "Listen to me. Hashtanaba is not just a warrior. He is a man whose honor is sacred. Insulting him, mocking him, laying hands on him, that is not something he forgets." Holly bristled. "You saying he'll come back for revenge?" "No," she said firmly. "That's not his way. But a man like him attracts danger, enemies, old blood debts, rival tribes, even outlaws who fear him." She looked Holly dead in the eye. "If word spreads that he was here and that you provoked him, you won't just have angered him. You may have invited danger on this entire town." For the first time, Hale's confidence faltered. "Just a crack, but enough for Ruth to see. You think I can't handle one Apache?" He muttered. "This isn't about one Apache," she whispered. "This is about the kind of man the world hunts." Silence settled thick between them. Then Ruth stepped back, her voice softer but heavier. "You should apologize, Douglas, before something darker than pride answers in his place." She left the office, her skirts rustling like a warning wind. The sheriff stared after her. Jaw tight, eyes storming. Owen swallowed. Sheriff. She might be right. Hawley didn't answer, but deep down, in a place he'd never admit aloud, he felt it. The seed of disrespect the Apache spoke of? It had begun to grow. Red Hollow woke the next morning to a silence that didn't feel natural. No birds, no rooster calls, no early chatter from the saloon porch. Just a still, breathless quiet that seeped through every crack of the town dot. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. Sheriff. Hawley stood outside his office, mug of coffee cooling in his hand, trying to pretend he didn't notice the tension. He told himself last night's conversation with Miss Marlin meant nothing. Stories. Old tribal legends. Nothing a real lawman should fear. But the unease wouldn't leave. Deputy Owen joined him on the wooden walkway, eyes scanning the horizon. Sheriff. You feel that? Hawley grunted. Feel what? Like the desert's holding its breath. Before Hawley could respond, the distant thunder of hooves rolled across the ground. Not the steady rhythm of travelers. This was heavier, meaner. A dozen riders. Maybe more. The townsfolk began stepping out. Squinting toward the east, dust rose in a thick cloud, and then they appeared black-coated men, rough, armed to the teeth, riding hard and fast straight toward Red Hollow. Hale's stomach dropped. He knew that brand burned on their horses' flanks, a skull carved with two jagged lines. The Kincaid. Gang killers, horse thieves. Blood debt collectors. The kind of men even other criminals avoided, and they didn't slow down when they reached the town's edge. They rode straight in, scattering chickens and making children scream. Hawley stepped forward, hand on his revolver. Hold it right there. The gang's leader, B.O. Kincaid himself, pulled his horse to a halt. He was a brawny man with a scar that split his face from brow to chin, giving him a permanent sneer. His eyes were cold blue, washed out and empty. Well, Kincaid drawled. Red Hollow's mighty lawman. Shame we didn't come for you. Hawley lifted his chin. You're ridden and armed. That's enough trouble already. State your business. Kincaid smirked. We're looking for someone. Owen stiffened beside him. Hawley felt his pulse spike. Who? Hawley asked. Kincaid leaned forward in his saddle. Apache. Tall, quiet, hair in a red-wrapped braid. Heard he passed through yesterday. A murmur ran through the crowd. Hale's mouth went dry. What do you want with him? Kincaid laughed a harsh, humorless sound. Want with him? Sheriff, we want him dead. Been wantin' it for a long time. A sick weight settled in the sheriff's gut. Miss Marlin's warnings echoed in his ears. A man like him attracts danger. Enemies, blood debts. The Kincaid gang was exactly the kind of danger she meant. What's he done? Hawley asked carefully. What hasn't he done? Kincaid replied. Man's a nightmare. Took down half my crew 3 years back. Didn't kill him, just made sure they remembered him every time the rain came and their bones ached. A few of the gang members shifted uncomfortably, as if the memory still hurt. Kincaid's smile twisted. He humiliated us. Took something from us too, something valuable. What? Hawley asked. Kincaid's voice went cold. Fear. The sheriff's spine tightened, and we aim to take it back. Every drop. Hawley swallowed. He ain't here. Kincaid nodded. Maybe, maybe not. He scanned the faces watching from porches and windows. But he came through, and a man like him leaves tracks. So here's what's going to happen. He held up a folded piece of paper and tossed it to Hawley. The sheriff caught it, unfolded it, and felt his throat constrict. A sketch. The Apache warrior, a bounty, $10,000 dead, $15,000 alive. Kincaid's voice dropped to a growl. If any man, woman, or child in this town tries to help him, we'll burn Red Hollow to ash. The gang turned their horses toward the far trail, kicking up more dust, but just before they rode off, Kincaid twisted back and added, "Tell your people this, if they see him." They didn't. Then the gang thundered away, leaving the town trembling in their wake. Owen exhaled shakily. "Sheriff, that bounty's real. That means the stories are real too." Holly stared at the paper, palms sweating, for the first time since mocking the Apache. Sheriff Douglas Holly realized he hadn't provoked a man. He'd provoked a legend. Red Hollow didn't sleep that night. The Kincaid gang's visit hung in the air like smoke after a wildfire. Doors were bolted, lanterns kept burning, and every creak of the wind made people flinch. The bounty posters circulated from hand to hand and with every passerby. The number printed on it seemed to grow heavier, $15,000 alive. $10,000 dead. No one in town had ever been worth that much money in their lives. Not the sheriff. Not the mayor. Certainly not any outlaw they'd ever seen strung up on the gallows. But this Apache. Warrior Naaba- was Dot. He had walked into their town completely unarmed and utterly calm. Townfolk weren't the only ones losing sleep. Sheriff Hawley tossed and turned until dawn. He kept seeing the warrior's steady eyes, hearing Miss Marlin's warnings, hearing Kincaid's threat. "We want him dead. By morning," Hawley snapped. He couldn't stand the whispers anymore, the murmurs that he'd been thrown into the dirt like a rag doll. The rumors that the Apache had spared him out of pity. The thought burned. If Hawley wanted his authority back, he needed a public victory. He needed to prove that he wasn't scared, and so he decided to commit the greatest foolishness of his life. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Hawley and Deputy Owen rode out of town. The sheriff didn't bother with stealth. He wanted the warrior to hear him coming. The horses' hoofs thundered across the dry earth as Hawley scanned for tracks. "He went north," Owen said quietly. "Toward the ridge. You sure? He walks heavy on his right foot. Injury from years ago. You can see the drag on the prints." Owen had an eye for detail, something Hawley was usually proud of, except today it made him uneasy. If the deputy could track him, any outlaw could too, but pride drowned out every warning. They found the Apache standing on the slope of a hill overlooking the valley. Arms crossed loosely, face calm as the morning sky. He didn't seem surprised to see them. If anything, he looked disappointed. He spoke first. "More trouble?" Hawley ground his teeth. "You're macking the trouble. That gang that wants your head, they came here yesterday. Threatened all of Red Hollow just for sheltering you." The warrior nodded once. "I assumed they would come. You knew they were a threat?" Hawley barked. "And you didn't warn us?" The Apache met his gaze. "Your people are afraid of me. They would fear my enemies more." I did not stay long. "Doesn't matter," Hawley said. "You brought danger, and now you're gonna fix it." The warrior tilted his head. "How?" Hawley swallowed, puffed out his chest, and said the words he'd rehearsed in his head all night. "You and me. A duel, right now." Owen's mouth fell open. "Sheriff," Hawley ignored him. "Winner decides what happens next." The Apache stared at him for a long moment, eyes calm. Then he said, quietly but firmly, "No." Hawley flinched as if struck. "What do you mean, no?" "I do not fight men who mistake pride for strength." The Apache's tone stayed mild, but it cut deeper than a blade. "You want respect. A duel will not give it to you." Hale's hand twitched toward his gun. "Draw?" "No." "I said draw." "No." The sheriff's face flushed red. "You afraid?" A faint, almost pitying smile touched the warrior's lips. "Of you? No. I fear for your people, not for myself." Hawley exploded. "Then fight, damn you." The Apache stepped closer, not aggressively, but with a solemn weight. He looked the sheriff straight in the eyes. "You misunderstand." His voice lowered. "A duel between us would not be a fight. It would be a killing." Hawley went still. Owen exhaled shakily. The warrior continued, "I am not your enemy. I have no quarrel with you. But if you push for this, if you force it, then I will end it, quickly, cleanly, because that is mercy." The sheriff felt the words like cold water poured down his spine. For the first time, he believed Miss Marlin's warnings. This man didn't brag. He didn't boast. He simply said the truth. "I will leave your lands today," the Apache said. "But stop chasing me. Do not seek a fight you cannot win." Then he turned away. And Hawley, stunned into silence, let him. For the first time in his life, the sheriff understood what real danger looked like, and it walked away from him without a second thought. Sheriff Hawley returned to Red Hollow a quiet, shaken man. Not defeated, not yet, but shaken in a way he didn't understand. Pride was the only compass he'd ever trusted. And now even that spun uselessly. He hadn't won back control. He hadn't earned back respect. He had only witnessed the terrifying confidence of a man who didn't need to prove anything. And that was far more frightening than losing a duel. By late afternoon, Hawley decided he needed whiskey. A lot of it. He sat in the dim saloon nursing his fourth glass, staring into the amber liquid as if it held answers. Deputy Owen sat across from him, uncomfortable in the silence. Finally, he spoke. "Sheriff, the Apache wasn't trying to shame you." Hawley snorted. "Could have fooled me." "He warned you," Owen said softly. "Warned you out of respect." Hawley didn't respond. He wasn't ready to admit the truth. Not yet. Outside, the wind picked up. A harsh, restless wind that scraped dust along the street boards like claws. Lanterns flickered. Dogs barked nervously from behind fences. The Kincaid gang was returning, but no one realized it until it was too late. Night fell faster than usual, swallowed by a darkness that felt thicker than clouded sky. Hawley stumbled out of the saloon, Owen at his elbow, both heading toward the office. They didn't make it 10 steps. The first gunshot shattered the night. Owen cried out and hit the dirt, the bullet grazing his arm. Hall spun too slow, too drunk, and found himself staring down the muzzles of 6 rifles. Bo Kincaid smirked from the shadows, stepping into the lamplight. "Well now, didn't expect to find you so easy." Hawley reached for his gun. Kincaid shook his head. "Don't." A boot slammed into Hale's back, sending him face first into the dirt. Rough hands grabbed his arms, binding them behind him. Owen tried to resist, but a punch to the jaw sent him limp. "You sons of," Hawley started, but a gag cut him off. Kincaid crouched beside him. "We tracked him. The Apache. Thought maybe he'd return here to warn you folks. Instead, we found tracks heading into the mesa." Hale's breath hitched. Kincaid chuckled. "Oh, yes. We know where he's sleeping." He grabbed Hale's chin, forcing him to meet his eyes. "But first, Sheriff, you're going to tell us everything you know about him. Every trick, every weakness, every scrap of information." Hawley tried to shake his head, but the gang hauled him upright, dragging him toward the desert outside town. Miss Marlin, watching from behind a curtain, nearly screamed, but she held herself back and ran to find help. They took Hawley to an abandoned sheep pen miles from town. The place reeked of dust and old blood, a place used before for cruelty. They tied him to a post. Rough rope bit his wrists. Dust choked his mouth. Kincaid paced before him like a wolf deciding where to bite. "You humiliated yourself, Sheriff," Kincaid said, "and now you're going to pay for it." Hawley swallowed hard. Even he, in his stubbornness, knew just how bad this could get. "But don't worry," Kincaid added with a grin. Your Apache friend'll be along soon. He has a habit of savin' fools." Hale's heart thudded painfully. "He's not my friend," he wanted to say, but the gag silenced him. The gang laughed, and then the desert went quiet, not just calm silent. Kincaid paused, frowning. "Boys, you hear that?" One outlaw opened his mouth to reply. He never finished the sentence. A shadow dropped from the roof of the sheep pen, landing silently behind him. In one motion, the Apache warrior seized the outlaw's rifle, flipped him over his shoulder, and knocked him unconscious with the butt. Before anyone could react, lanterns blew out, snuffed by swift, precise kicks. Darkness swallowed everything. Panic erupted. "Where is he?" "He's behind." No. Thuds, crashes, gasps of pain, but no gunshots. No war cries. Hashtmaba moved like a ghost, disarming, disabling, but never killing. Within minutes, 10 armed men lay groaning or unconscious on the ground. Only Kincaid remained standing, breath ragged, eyes wide with terror. You ain't human," he whispered. The Apache stepped into the faint moonlight, face calm. "I warned you," he said quietly. Then he reached behind him, cut Hale's ropes with a single swipe of his knife, and helped the battered sheriff to his feet. "You?" Hawley croaked, stunned. "You saved me." The Apache met his gaze. "Not for you. For the innocent people you're ogden. Death would endanger." Hawley felt something break inside him, something heavy and toxic. Pride. 4. The first time in his life, he saw himself clearly, and he saw the man he had mocked, not as an enemy, but as a protector greater than any sheriff could ever hope to be. By dawn the next morning, the entire town buzzed like a hornet nest kicked open. No one talked about cattle prices, or the coming rain, or the church bake sale. They talked about one thing: what happened behind the jail last night. The sheriff's humiliation had spread faster than wildfire on dry brush. People whispered it at the saloon before breakfast. They murmured it at the blacksmith's while shoes were hammered onto horses. Even the school children, barely tall enough to hold a slate, mimicked the story in exaggerated pantomime, one playing Sheriff Boone puffing his chest, another playing the silent Apache who merely tilted his head with that slow, deadly smile. And the worst part? Every retelling made the sheriff look smaller and the Apache warrior larger. Boone felt it the moment he stepped outside. The air, usually filled with nods and "Mornin', Sheriff," now crackled with suppressed laughter, quickly smothered when he turned his head. The men on the boardwalk kept their eyes down, hats low, but not out of respect, out of amusement. The women leaned close to each other as he passed, sharing quiet whispers. Even the dogs seemed to sense something was off and gave him an unusually wide berth. Boone tried to pretend nothing was wrong. He walked straighter. He jangled his badge more than usual. He swung his arms like a man who had everything under control, but the truth was a tight knot behind his ribs. His jaw clenched until his teeth hurt. He felt hunted not by the Apache warrior himself, but by the eyes of the town, because word had spread that the key office of the sheriff had been made a fool, that the deadliest Apache warrior in the territory had sized him up and dismissed him like a buzzing fly, and worst of all, that Boone hadn't fought back, he'd frozen. The one thing he always mocked other men for. The first man bold enough to speak to him was Floyd Mercer, the saloon owner, a man who usually trembled if the sheriff so much as frowned at him. "Sheriff Boone," Floyd said, a twitch pulling at the corner of his lip. "Heard you had a bit of excitement last night." Boone's eyes narrowed. "You got something you want to say?" Floyd swallowed hard. "No, sir. Just meaning, Apache fella sure walked around with confidence. Folks say he's different." "Different how?" Boone snapped. Floyd leaned in, lowering his voice. like a man who's waited his whole life for someone stupid enough to challenge him. Boone stiffened. "You calling me stupid?" "No," Floyd squeaked. No. Just repeating what I heard." Boone stormed away, but the words clung to him like burrs. Behind him, Floyd whispered to a patron, "He's scared." Sheriff ain't been scared a day in his life, but he's scared now. By midday, the townsfolk weren't whispering anymore, they were speculating. "Did you see his face when the Apache looked at him? He looked ready to faint. Heard the warrior. Killed men with just a bone knife. I heard he once took down 3 Texas Rangers with his bare hands. Here. He's coming back." That last one hit Boone like a punch to the gut, because it wasn't rumor not anymore. A little before sunset, Deputy Harlan rushed into the sheriff's office, panting like he'd run the whole way. "He's back," Harlan blurted. "The Apache. He's ridden toward town." Boone's blood turned cold. "Alone?" "No, he's got a woman with him. Apache, too." Boone's fists clenched. "What does he want?" Harlan swallowed. From the look on his face, not trouble, but he looks like a man demanding something, like he won't leave without it. Boone's heartbeat thundered in his ears. The humiliation wasn't over, it was just beginning. Thunder didn't roll across the sky, but it might as well have. The moment the Apache warrior rode into town again, the air shifted. Men straightened. Women froze mid-step. Children clung to fences as if witnessing the opening scene of a legend they would repeat decades later. Dust swirled behind the warrior's horse, the same tall, battle-scarred Mustang as before. But this time, something about him was different, calmer, heavier, as if he carried not a threat, but a purpose. And riding beside him was a woman. She sat her horse with the same quiet authority, her posture proud, her expression unreadable. Her long black hair was braided with strips of red cloth, and her eyes steady. Calm swept across town as though memorizing everything at once. The whispers began instantly. "That's his wife." "No, his sister. He wouldn't bring a woman unless what? Unless he came to settle something." Sheriff Boone stood stiffly on the wooden walkway outside the jailhouse, his stomach churning like a kicked bucket. The deputy Harlan hovered behind him, trying to look brave and failing miserably as the warrior approached. His gaze locked straight on Boone, that same piercing, completely unafraid stare. The stare of a man who had looked death in the eye too many times to count and had walked away. Every time. The horses stopped only 10 feet from him. "Sheriff," the warrior said, speaking English this time. His voice was deep controlled. "My name is Koya." Boone swallowed hard. Hearing the name made the townsfolk gasp. They knew that name. The stories. The battles. The impossible feats whispered along the borderlands. Koya was a deadly reputation made flesh. Boone tried to stand taller. "What do you want now?" Koya didn't blink. "The woman with me, she is hurt." The Apache woman lifted her chin. "Not hurt," she corrected softly. "Only tired. She needs water," Koya continued, ignoring her protest. "And a place to rest while I finish what I came here for." Boone's heartbeat stuttered. "Finish? Finish what, exactly?" Koya pointed at the ground between them. "You mocked me. Called me nothing. I want you to say what you meant by that." The crowd sucked in a breath. Boone's ears burned. Sweat prickled beneath his collar. He felt trapped, cornered by the entire town. If he apologized, he would look weak. If he didn't, he risked provoking the man everyone whispered could kill a mountain lion with his bare hands. Koya continued, "My people do not seek trouble, but a man's words matter." Boone forced a laugh. "You came all the way back here for an apology? You drag a woman along for that?" Koya's jaw tightened just slightly. "That's small." Dangerous shift Boone remembered from the night behind the jail. The woman is my wife, Kocha said, and she is here because she wished to see the man foolish enough to challenge me. The town exploded with murmurs. Boone's face flushed red. I didn't challenge you. But you mocked me, Kocha replied calmly. And you did it not as a drunk man or a frightened man, but as a sheriff, a leader. Your words carry weight. Boone felt Harlan step back behind him, as if distancing himself from the blast radius. So, Boone said slowly, you want me to take it back? Koya shook his head once. No, I want you to say it again. To my face. With no crowd. No badge. No gun. The crowd froze. Even the horses stopped breathing. Boone felt his knees threaten to buckle. Say it again? The very words that nearly got his throat sliced? But Koya wasn't finished. After that, Koya added, I will decide if you are a man worth respecting, or a man worth forgetting. A chill crawled up Boone's spine. Forget. In Apache terms, that didn't mean ignoring someone. It meant someone so dishonorable they didn't exist. Kohia turned his horse. I will wait behind the stable, he said. Sunset. The warrior and his wife rode away without looking back. Boone exhaled shakily, and the entire town knew. The sheriff had until sunset to prove what kind of man he was. The sun crawled toward the horizon like a slow-burning fuse, staining the town gold and blood-red colors that felt uncomfortably like a warning. Even the dust motes in the air seemed to hang suspended. Waiting. Sheriff Boone spent the hours pacing inside his office, wearing a groove in the floorboards. He tried to steady his breathing, but fear curled inside him like a living thing. Outside, the townsfolk gathered in clusters, unable to pretend this wasn't happening. This wasn't a gunfight or a drunken brawl. This was something older, something primal, a test of pride, a test of manhood, a test of whether the lawman who swaggered through town was truly made of iron or just painted tin. Deputy Harlan stood in the doorway. Sheriff, you don't gotta go. Boone stopped pacing. The hell I don't. He ain't a skin for blood. Just wants words. Boone glared at him. Words can get a man killed, Harlan. Harlan swallowed. That man Koya, he don't seem reckless. If he wanted to gut you, he'd have done it last night. Boone flinched. Because it was true, Koya hadn't drawn his knife. He hadn't raised his voice. He'd simply looked at Boone. And Boone had felt something worse than threat. He'd felt insignificance. Harlan lowered his voice. Sheriff, you mocked a man who has nothing to lose. That's the dangerous kind. Boone snapped. You think I don't know that? Silence stretched between them before Boone grabbed his hat and shoved past the deputy. The sooner he faced this, the sooner it would end one way or another. As he stepped outside, a hush fell over the boardwalk. He's going. Sheriff's really doing it. Think he'll apologize? No. Boone'll die before that. Boone heard every word. For once, none of it felt like praise. Behind the stable, the evening light softened, painting the earth in amber shadows. Kohya stood alone, leaning casually against a fence post, arms folded. His wife sat on a crate nearby, watching with calm, observant eyes. She seemed utterly unafraid. Boone approached, throat dry. His boots felt impossibly loud against the packed dirt. Koya didn't move. You came. Boone forced himself to meet the man's gaze. You called me here. I did. Koya pushed off the fence post. Now speak. Boone's heartbeat hammered. What do you want me to say? What you said before. Koya's eyes were unblinking, ancient storms hidden behind them. You called me nothing. Say it again. Boone's tongue felt heavy. Everyone else talked about courage as if it were muscle, something a man simply flexed. But courage was a bone, and right now it felt fractured. Koya took a step closer. Was it a lie? Or do you believe it? Boone felt heat rise up his neck. I said it because you walked into my town like you owned the place. I walked into your town, Kohya said, like a man who does not fear men. Boone swallowed. Kohya's voice remained calm, too calm. Say the words again. Then I will know if you stand behind them. Boone's fists clenched. Pride warred with terror inside him. Finally he exhaled. Slow, bitter. I was wrong. The words scorched his throat on the way out. Kohya's expression didn't change. Say it clearly. Boone shut his eyes. I was wrong, he repeated, louder this time. I shouldn't have mocked you. I shouldn't have called you. Nothing. When he opened his eyes, Kohya stood inches from him. The Apache warrior studied him like a sculptor examining a cracked statue, seeing every flaw. Every fracture. Then, to Boone's shock. Kohya nodded once. That is enough. Boone blinked. That's it? You dragged me out here for an apology? Kohya stepped back. I dragged you out here to see if you would stand like a man or hide like a coward. He turned slightly, glancing at his wife. He stood. Boone felt a strange, unexpected flood of relief. Kohya continued. A man who can admit his wrongs is not weak. Only men afraid of truth are weak. Boone swallowed hard. So, we're done? Kohya nodded. We are done. Then he added quietly, but this town is not. Boone stiffened. What does that mean? The Apache woman stood. Her gaze was sharp as flint. It means, she said, that trouble is coming, and your town is not ready. Before Boone could ask more, Kohya turned away. The warrior and his wife walked into the sunset, silent shadows against the fading light, leaving Boone with a new fear, one he couldn't laugh off or swagger past. What kind of trouble? And why were they warning him? Red Hollow awoke the next morning with an uneasy calm. The sun rose over the dusty streets, shining on a town that felt smaller than it had the day before. Even the wind seemed hesitant, whispering rather than roaring across the boardwalks. Sheriff Boone walked out of his office, his steps measured and quiet. His pride had been bruised, but his mind had shifted. The Apache warrior Hashkanaba, or Kohya, had left him alive, yes, but more importantly, he had left him changed. The townsfolk watched as Boone walked past. Their gazes lingered curious, wary, even a little respectful. Not for the sheriff's authority, but because the man who had faced the deadliest warrior alive without fleeing had survived not through firepower, but through humility. Deputy Harlan fell in step beside him. Sheriff, you all right? Boone nodded slowly, staring down at the rough wooden planks beneath his boots. I will be, but this town, he gestured vaguely, it needs to understand what kind of world it lives in. Harlan frowned. You mean the Apache? Boone shook his head. Not just him. Danger doesn't always look like guns. Sometimes it walks calmly. Sometimes it speaks softly. Sometimes it gives you a chance to survive if you have the sense to take it. The wind shifted again, and with it came faint echoes of hoofbeats from the ridge to the north. Boone's gaze drifted. He's out there somewhere. Kohya? And whatever shadows follow him. Harlan swallowed. You think he'll come back? Boone sighed. I don't know. But I do know one thing. If he does, we won't meet him with pride or guns. We'll meet him with respect. And we'll remember what that means. The townsfolk, hearing this, began to murmur among themselves. They had spent generations mocking, fighting, and assuming superiority over things they didn't understand. And now, in the wake of Kohya's visit, they realized that survival sometimes required wisdom more than bullets. Meanwhile, across the mesa, Kohya and his wife rode in silence. The sun gilded the horizon behind them, turning their shadows into long, stretching silhouettes. The Apache warrior's face remained calm, unreadable. But even in the quiet, there was a weight in his posture, an awareness that the world beyond his people's lands was dangerous, fragile, and full of arrogance. His wife spoke softly. "Do you think the sheriff learned?" Koya glanced at her, a faint curve at the corner of his lips. "He learned the first lesson. Pride is a dangerous weapon in the hands of a man who cannot measure it. But knowledge, respect, understanding, that is what keeps a town alive." She nodded. "And if he forgets?" Koya's expression darkened subtly. "Then he will face the consequences. And I will not intervene again, not for him, not for the town." Back in Red Hollow, Boone began visiting each household, speaking to citizens quietly but firmly. He taught children not only how to ride and shoot, but how to recognize strength beyond brute force. He reminded men that courage wasn't loud, it was measured. And he reminded everyone that respect could be more valuable than fear. By nightfall, the town had changed, subtly but irreversibly. The people who had once mocked, whispered, and sneered now moved with a cautious humility. They had seen a man unmatched in skill and mercy. They had seen the consequences of arrogance. And they had understood that the world was bigger than their boardwalks and dusty streets. Boone stood outside the saloon, watching the sunset. Somewhere to the north, Kohia and his wife disappeared over the horizon, leaving only the memory of their visit, a lesson carved deeper than any bullet wound. Sheriff Douglas Hale, once proud, once mocking, once overconfident, closed his eyes. He had been humbled, yes, but he had learned something far more valuable. Power was not just in the hand that wields it. It was in the mind that measured it, the heart that restrained it, and the wisdom to know when not to use it at all. And with that understanding, Red Hollow endured, waiting for the next storm, but prepared. In a way it had never been before. The Apache warrior had left, but his shadow lingered, not as a threat, but as a teacher. And the sheriff, for the first time, understood that some men were not defeated by guns, nor by fear, but by the simple, inescapable force of respect.